Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, we are going to go back to D&D 5 and talk about the Tomb of Annihilation. Now, this is a an adventure supplement, a campaign that is about 3 years old at this point. Um, and it is, in my opinion, very poorly named and poorly marketed because it's actually a lot more interesting than a lot of you might think. I know that for me and for my group, and actually for several other players that I've talked to, they heard Tomb of Annihilation and they heard it compared to the Tomb of Horrors and immediately lost interest in it. The Tomb of Horrors is a classic first edition Gary Gygax original dungeon crawl, and the dungeon crawl to end all dungeon crawls. If you're interested in it, Tales from the Yawning Portal for 5th edition updates it and reprints it. And it's basically just this enormous dungeon thing that you go through, and there's traps, and there's puzzles, and there's monsters to fight, and virtually no role playing. And if that's what you are into, then that's fine. That's not what I'm into, and that's not what a lot of people are into. And so Tomb of Horrors holds no appeal for me. Tomb of Annihilation, because of that comparison, felt the same. And I thought, oh, well, there's an adventure supplement that I can safely ignore because dungeons get boring if they go on too long, and a dungeon that big is just going to be boring. Well, as it happens, once I finally dug into it and started reading through it, Tomb of Annihilation is 1,000 times more interesting than the marketing led you to believe it was. And we'll get into that in a little bit. It's got a huge dungeon in it, but the dungeon itself is structured in such a way that actual role playing and social interaction is still a part of it, which is awesome. And B, the getting to the dungeon and finding the dungeon involves many, many, many levels worth of exploring, including a giant hex map that you get to, explore, and some cool jungle survival rules that you get to play with. And there's a bunch of other people to interact with, so it's super cool. But before we get to that, I want to address very quickly a little bit of the controversy surrounding Tomb of Annihilation. And again, this is 3 years old, and so this is kind of old news at this point. When the book came out, it was critiqued by a lot of people for portraying some lazy stereotypes of Africa and of Africans. And I don't think it is worth me going into the details of it right now, except to say that it clearly bothered a lot of people, enough people, in fact, that June or July of last year, in 2020, Wizards of the Coast announced some changes and some updates. They've actually gone through, and if you, like me, have the digital version of the game through D&D Beyond, the changes that they've made are already in there. They are going to be making some more changes, and they are also going to, they've announced an initiative where they are going to make sure that they have good representation of pertinent ethnicities on every project they do in the future. And this announcement that they made last year, specifically they mentioned Curse of Strahd, which has lazy stereotypes of the Roma people in the Vistani, and Tomb of Annihilation, which, like I said, has lazy stereotypes of Africa. And what I mean by lazy stereotypes is we're getting into territory that I know is going to get me yelled at in the comments, because some people insist that any move towards sensitivity or diversity of any kind is automatically too PC and wrong-headed and thought police and on and on and on. And you're wrong. Sorry. Uh, any effort to make this hobby more welcoming and more accessible to a wide range of people is awesome. Taking the one and only culture of black people presented in the world of Faerun in the Forgotten Realms and turning it into a very by the numbers pastiche of post colonial Africa is lazy. Like I said, it is not intentionally harmful. They did not set out with racist attitudes or racist designs to hurt people. That's not what I'm saying, and I'm not accusing anybody of doing that. But by their own admission, they took the easy route and didn't consider a lot of things that did, in the real world, end up being problematic for a lot of real people. And so I laud them for taking steps to change that. And that is going to be great. There are definitely lots of things you can look up if you'd like to know more about this. You can look at some of the original complaints that were made online. You can look at a lot of really great resources that you can find with a very simple Google search of how to address these concerns, how to change things. It may be that you and your playgroup can play through this adventure without even noticing any problems. And if that's the case, then do that. I think that there is some value in educating yourselves, but I'm not going to tell you how to play the game or what you are or are not allowed to enjoy. If there are people in your group that do find this problematic, then it behooves you. I think you have the responsibility as a game master or player in that group to make those people comfortable because they are your friends and you want to be a good friend. So, that said, this is a topic that has been covered elsewhere. I want to mention it just so that you know the issue exists and that you can look into it on your own and solve whatever issues with your group the way that makes you all happy. That's awesome. I also wanted to, make sure to give a shout out to Wizard because that they are working towards solving this problem not only right now, but for all future supplements and campaigns, and I think that that is fantastic. Hooray! We want this hobby to be wonderful for everybody. Anyway, let's move on. We're not talking about this anymore in this particular review. We are going to go into the game supplement itself. So, I'm going to jump into the browser view, and we're going to show you D&D Beyond. So, this is the table of contents for Tomb of Annihilation. And this, it isn't, this is the whole thing, too. You don't need to worry that you can't see anything important, because there isn't anything really below this. The premise behind this, the hook for it, is that there is a death curse on the land. And what the death curse does is anybody who has died and been brought back to life through a resurrection spell or anything like that is starting to waste away. And so the characters are approached, and this is designed for level 1 through like 11 or 12. The characters are approached by a wealthy person in Waterdeep who says, "Hey, I'm dying. I need you to go and solve this problem." And she has traced the death curse to the land of Cholt, which is like a, like I said, it's a kind of Indiana Jones-esque version of Africa. And so it's got a port city called Nyanzaru. It's got a lot of other explorers and people who have arrived there. and it has this vast jungle to explore that has ancient ruins at the heart of it. And so there's a lot going on. It's very cool stuff. It's very evocative of old style serials. Kind of, like I said, colonial visions of Africa as a dark continent, which is fraught with tricky problems, but they have taken certain steps, to make that cool, or make that accessible to people and welcoming to people. Port Nyanzaru, for example, in earlier versions, earlier editions of D&D, Chult was just a straight, jungle full of savages, and it is not that anymore, to their credit, which is great. The port is run by the local people, the Chultans. They have a very interesting culture. It's very cool. Getting back to the adventure itself, the Death Curse is, despite being the hook for the adventure, it is something that I recommend, and actually a lot of people recommend, that you downplay that significantly. Because there's so much to do and so much to explore, so many side quests, so many people to interact with, so many really exciting things to find in the jungle, that if you put them on this really strict clock of the Death Curse, it can just cause people to rush through the adventure without really taking time to explore everything and find everything and enjoy everything. Now, if what you need is a really strict clock, then it's there. I recommend that you treat it a little more ethereally. So it's not just every day people die more, but that it's, when you need to hurry the adventurers along, the Death Curse ramps up. When you are content with the pace of the adventure, the Death Curse just stays where it is. In most cases, most player groups, especially at level 1, are not going to be personally affected by the Death Curse in any way. So it makes for a weird hook to begin with. Because this lady comes out of the blue and says, "I'm dying, you don't know who I am or care, please dedicate the next 11 levels of your life to saving me." Which, I suppose, as role-playing hooks go, is, par for the course. But finding ways to incorporate the player's background into the story, giving them other reasons to be interested in this, ends up taking you more time, but being much more desirable and much more exciting, and I think much more fulfilling for the players. And they actually have here a whole section of character backgrounds, where if you want to, be an anthropologist or an archaeologist who, is already kind of Indiana Jonesy anyway, you can do that. If you want to have your characters actually come from Chult and be part of this culture, that is also an option. So anyway, regardless of how the characters end up traveling to Port Nyanzaru, that's where the adventure really begins. They get, hired or persuaded to do this job, and then they end up there. So Port Nyanzaru, all by itself, is a fascinating place, and you can spend several levels just kicking around there, talking to people, performing little side quests, but eventually you are going to end up exploring the land of Chult. And so I'm going to show you these two maps here. So first of all, there is this map of Chult. And this is, come on, I want to be able to zoom in on this so you can really see it, because it gets into hexes. Okay? So, you got Port Nyanzaru right up here at the top, and then the characters go through and they can explore all this other stuff. And the keys are marking areas that are filled with undead, areas that are filled with way more undead, different kind of mining or expedition sites. And then, of course, there are other things all through here. There are lost cities. There are kind of other lost expeditions. It's all really exciting stuff. But the player version of that map is mostly blank. And this is what really excites me. There are extensive rules for how to travel through the jungle, keeping track of travel time, keeping track of how much food and water you have, finding your way through the jungle. And they are granular enough with these rules that they're like, if you have a ranger with you who specializes in jungle territory, then you'll be able to travel this way. And if you don't, then you're going to be able to travel in this other manner, and so on. And so as you go through, there are plot hooks, and there are character hooks, and there are several different guides that you can hire. There's something like 8 or even 10 guides, each with their own personality, each with their own little side quests and interests, and they can help guide you towards some of the key, really exciting parts of this continent. And you might decide that you are going to, sail out by boat and try to come around somewhere else. You might decide that you're just going to go straight trekking through the middle of this. However you do it, you have the chance to slowly, bit by bit, explore this enormous continent and get to know what's on it. You get to meet some of the people who live there, and some of them are, little villages that are inside of the jungle. Some of them are previous expeditions that tried to go through and get lost. Some of them are ancient civilizations that are populated now just by ghosts, or the Yuan Ti, the snake people, are in here a lot. And so this is all just, like I said, very evocative stuff about exploration and discovery and kind of pulp adventure. And it's really cool. And like I said, way more interesting than just, here's a new Tomb of Horrors. So that's all fantastic stuff. Now, once eventually you are going to find the city of Omu. And that is where the actual tomb is. That is where your paths are eventually going to lead you. And you notice on this map that I just put up, the location of Omu is not on here. A big part of the adventure, a significant portion of your time, is not just trekking through the jungle, but trying to find Omu. Whether you're talking to people who you think might know, or just exploring around trying to find it, however it works, eventually you're going to find the city of Omu. And there's a lot to discover there, and a lot of people to talk to there, before you end up in the actual tomb of the Nine Gods itself. Now, the tomb is the big dungeon at the end. And it is a big dungeon. It's not Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which I think is far too big to be tenable for most groups. And it is not Tomb of Horrors either. It is definitely deadly, and it is definitely very old school in a lot of its design choices. There are puzzles constantly that you need to solve. There are traps all over the place. And a lot of this comes from, the origins of D&D dungeon crawling. Kind of the two original dungeons that inspired our entire hobby are first Moria from the Lord of the Rings, and second, the kind of generic Mesoamerican temple from the opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The idea that Indiana Jones and his little group of buddies are going through this dungeon, and they're finding traps, there's pits, there's stakes, there's poison darts, there's the giant rolling boulder. All of these are little traps and puzzles that people have to solve. Those two dungeons, that and Moria, contain all the DNA that basically created the dungeon side of Dungeons and Dragons way back in the day. And you get all of that here in the Tomb of the Nine Gods. But The great innovation that they have added here, that I think is what really makes this playable and exciting, especially for a modern audience, is that this dungeon is filled with people to interact with. One of the things that you will hear about a lot in role-playing games is what they call the three pillars. And depending on who you talk to, the three pillars are defined slightly differently, but the idea behind them is that anytime a player or a player group encounters an obstacle, there are three ways to solve it: subterfuge, violence, and conversation. You can hit a problem, you can talk to a problem, or you can sneak past a problem. And those really are kind of what, at the end of the day, every player character class in D&T boils down to: some combination of expertise in those three areas. And so what you want to do is make sure that if somebody, for example, has planned a character who is all based around stealth and sneakiness, then if your role-playing adventure or your campaign is just pure combat, they're not going to feel like they have as much to do. It's nice that they can sneak around the periphery of a fight and flank and sneak attack people, but if the fantasy that is getting them excited, the reason that they designed that character, if that fantasy is they want to sneak in places and they want to, start robbing people, they want to break into safes, they want to slip through locked windows and move around like a ghost, then that's what they want to do, and you need to give them opportunities to do that. By the same token, if somebody designs a character who is based purely on talking, if they want to be the face, if they want to be the con artist, if they want to be able to talk to people and use diplomacy and bluff and persuasion and all of those, deception, then, an adventure that is pure dungeon crawl, that's just traps and puzzles and monsters, they're not going to have much to do. And they probably have some combat powers because it's impossible not to in D&D. But the fantasy that got them excited and made them create that character in the first place is that they want to talk to people. And now you've got them in the middle of this giant dungeon where they're going to be for maybe 7 or 8 player sessions, and they don't get to do the thing that they love to do. And so what they've done here is there's actually, let's say, 3 big things that they've done. First of all, a lot of dungeons do include monsters you can talk to. And that is, already interesting and good. That gives you all 3 pillars already, right? You get up to a room, and there's a chance to kill this monster, or sneak past this monster, or talk to this monster. That's awesome. On top of that, here in the Tomb of Annihilation, they have filled the tomb with other adventuring groups and treasure hunter groups. There's not a lot of them, but the adventure, while you're exploring the land of Chult here in Chapter 2 and you're going through this map, there's a lot of different groups that you can talk to, and some of them sneak in. There's also a rival expedition, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to give too many spoilers, but they are searching for the same thing you are searching for. And so they show up as well in that Temple of the Nine Gods when you're there. And so there's actually the possibility that they have already found some of the key artifacts that you need before you get there. Or maybe you get there at the same time and you end up dealing not only with a trap or a puzzle or a monster, but this rival expedition group at the same time, which makes everything more complicated and more interesting. They have also added these spirits of the 9 trickster gods. And this is the Tomb of the Nine Gods. You actually get to meet and interact with some or all of those trickster gods, because what they want to do is This is a spoiler. I'm not going to say it, okay? I'm not going to say it. What I am going to say is that there is a lot of really interesting and fun interaction that can be had depending on which of those 9 gods you meet and how you choose to deal with them. They can actually stay with your group for a while and wander around with you and continue to give you advice, or maybe give you bad advice because they are trickster gods after all. There's a lot of different things going on. Then, of course, at the very end, you meet the boss, the person who's behind this whole death curse and what they're trying to do and why. So there is a lot of role-playing and character interaction, conversation, diplomacy, deception, everything, even when you get to the dungeon crawl part of this dungeon campaign. And I think that that is wonderful, and I give them huge props for doing that. Overall, let's get back to the larger face here. Overall, Tomb of Annihilation is one of the most exciting campaigns published for D&D 5. And like I said, I think that it was named and marketed wrong because nothing about Tomb of Annihilation tells you, hey, guess what? We are going to do this really exciting Indiana Jones jungle exploration adventure. And that is what really hooks me and pulls me in. And nothing about the name or the cover suggests any of that. And the early marketing was all trying to tell a very different story. What it really is at the end of the day is this fascinating exploration adventure where you get to talk to a lot of different groups. You get to explore a lot of, trackless wilderness and also ancient temples and ghostly civilizations, hidden monster civilizations, all kinds of exciting stuff. There are guides to take you through the wilderness. There are people who have been lost that you can find. There's a really compelling story about, how death itself has been corrupted and turned to the wrong ends. So, now one thing I do want to say as like a final note is I have one group that I run D&D for that is excited about doing this adventure, but they're already higher level. This one starts, like I said, at 1 and will take you through about 10 or 11. By the time you get to level 8 or 9, which is where this other group already is, your ability to fly starts to become a lot more prevalent. You have druids that can turn into flying creatures. You have people who can summon very easily giant eagles, often in enough numbers to carry the entire group. And so that's not something that is entirely feasible long term unless you're very high level. But it can disrupt the jungle exploration portion of this. If you are lost in the jungle and so much of the narrative depends on the group being lost in the jungle, then the ability to very easily transport people through the air starts to become a little disruptive. And so I just want to throw that out as a warning to game masters that you are going to need to be very careful and very strict with how much air travel you want to allow and how you want to handle that. There are ways to discourage it. For example, maybe once you get above the tree line, then there's pterodactyls flying all over because this jungle is filled with dinosaurs. So maybe there's pterodactyls or dragons or something in the air, and the characters decide it's safer to travel over land. Or maybe you just want to kind of be super nitpicky about the carrying capacity of giant eagles, the flight speed, how far they can actually go. So maybe they only end up with 1 extra hex of travel per day, or maybe 2 extra hexes. But however you choose to handle that, it's something to keep in mind because it can be disruptive to the basic narrative story that assumes the characters will be low enough level that that won't be a huge issue. So, keep that in mind. What I am probably going to do with this group is actually run it all the way up to level 20. Kind of a, rather than 1 through 11, we'll take them 10 through 20 and just bump up the danger levels of all the monsters and make things, more complicated. Flight is the one that I am gonna have to keep a close eye on and see if I can make that work, but that's what we're gonna try. Anyway, Tomb of Annihilation is a lot of fun. They have done some really cool stuff. It is very unique among the rest of the D&D campaigns for 5th edition because it's in a very different setting, has a very different tone. It has that cool exploration Indiana Jones feel to it, and it all culminates in a dungeon that is not only kind of a throwback to old school dungeon crawling, but also has a lot of nice modern touches that enables people to interact with it in a variety of different ways, so you're not locked into a single play style. All told, fantastic campaign that they are actively working to improve even now, 3 years later, which is great. So, anyway, thank you for watching this review. My name is Dan Wells. Quick plug at the end. I am a professional game master, and I can run a campaign or a one-shot for you and your friends. This one or something else. I am also an author, and I would love for you to read my books. I've got 18 books in print and another one coming out in about a week and a half, which is going to be on Audible. It's called Stargazer. There's links to all of this stuff in the comments below, or the video description below, so check that out. I also wanted to just put out a question. If there is a particular game or supplement or adventure or rule system that you would love to have me cover in this series, let me know, because I would love to take a look at it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'm Dan Wells, and you are awesome.